What's wrong with that?
History and no, there's nothing wrong with that.
What's wrong with that?
But there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm coming to my point that essentially.
So hang on. So you just said that without belief in God, your meaning becomes the priority, and there's nothing wrong with that. So what's the objection?
I think this is the dumbest fucking argument I get all the time is morality objective or subjective? Doesn't matter. Is the adoption of a morality objective or subjective? And Laurent, it's subjective.
How is it solved? By appealing to a God.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for supporting the channel. As some of you know, the majority of my content on this channel is funded by patrons at patreon.com/atheistdebates. But all of the content is available for free to all of you. If you're able to become a patron, I appreciate the support, but this clip is not patron supported. It's from a call we took recently on the line. I'll be posting more clips like this, probably with this intro attached to all of them, especially as we near 200,000 subscribers here. So whether you're a patron, a YouTube subscriber, or just someone who views and comments, likes, and subscribes, thank you and enjoy.
So here we go. Laurent is calling from Australia, pronouns are he, him, wanting to ask something about whether atheism leads to the conclusion that doing evil is right. So Laurent, the short answer is no. Atheism is the position of not being convinced that a God exists, and it does not lead to any particular position on evil or good or right or wrong. So what led you to this question, and how can we help?
Yeah, hi, Matt. A pleasure. Watched some of your debates and shows. You're an absolute legend. So the reason I came to that conclusion is just through, I think, from more philosophical stand. Obviously, I think you've already heard many times that atheism doesn't have morality and so on. Usually, the common rebuttal is that atheism creates it, the morality is created, it's not universal, it's something as a society you create. And the same way as nihilism is sort of to say that there is no meaning in the world, but the individual creates its meaning. Is that correct?
I'm so confused now, because your question was about whether or not atheism encourages people to do wrong. And now you're asking me questions about atheism and nihilism. So let me answer this question again, which is atheism is a position on whether or not you're convinced that a God exists. That's it. There's nothing more to it. It doesn't tell you about morality. It doesn't tell you about nihilism. It doesn't tell you about anything at all. So
yeah, that is true. That is true. I guess I'm making that supposition because this is usually the position of atheists that we usually encounter in debates, or that usually those that atheist intellectuals usually fall into that category, if that's correct.
I don't need you to tell me why you came up with whatever question you came up with. I need you to ask the question that's going to get you the answer that is fucking relevant.
All right. Okay, so my argument is that if there is no absolute moral code, as I understand it, usually this is the position of atheists, as you say. If there is no God, there is
Christ.
Not an absolute.
Can you stop?
Yeah.
Can you stop with this? Usually this is the position of atheists, and just talk to the two of us who are actually fucking here, instead of trying to create a straw man and argue against people who aren't even fucking here. Could you just have the conversation with us, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
Laura,
There's no need
blow
to
your
get
mind.
angry.
I actually don't respect the intellectual positions of most atheists. So I don't care what you think atheists usually believe anyway.
Just let's talk about some fucking point without you mentioning what some other atheist said, because I do not give a fuck what other atheists say. I'm going to tell you about what I think, and Jimmy's going to tell you about what he thinks. And so you started off with a question that is, does atheism lead to? And the answer is no. Atheism does not lead to anything. There is nothing that, by merely not being convinced that a God exists, nothing is entailed from that. You could still worship gods that you don't believe in, even if you don't believe in them. So what is the question you're trying to get to? We'd love to be able to address it. Thank you.
I'm trying to think of how I can make this question or argument in a way that will not piss you off. So this is not
well,
how I
it's too late for that, Laurent, because the fact that you've been sitting there on hold for 20 minutes and that I've repeatedly answered the question you asked and that I'm asking you to actually get to a point has already pissed me off.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I was hoping to have
I know
like
it's unfortunate.
meaningful...
Why is it that you don't have, why aren't you ready with a question beyond the one that we already answered? I mean, are we done? Did we answer your one question and that's it?
Well, look, I'm trying to argue that without the belief in a God, it leads to essentially a position where your own meaning in life is the priority. So when you make your own meaning as your priority, because there is no higher meaning, yourself is the highest meaning. So
okay,
that is usually how we see history.
What's wrong with that?
History, and no, there's nothing wrong with that.
What's wrong with that?
But essentially, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm coming to my point that essentially,
hang on. So you just said that without belief in God, your meaning becomes the priority, and there's nothing wrong with that. So what's the objection?
The objection is that, in fact, if you create your own meaning in life, that meaning can essentially be what is viewed by the majority as wrong, as evil. So we've seen that in history. People have ambition, self-interest, and
yes, I might establish a meaning or purpose to my life that someone else might consider immoral. So what?
Yes.
But also, Laurent, you've done the same thing. I think this is the dumbest fucking argument I get all the time is morality objective or subjective? Doesn't matter. Is the adoption of morality objective or subjective? And Laurent, it's subjective. You adopted your morality the same way I adopted mine. Somebody made a case. It was another human. You consumed it in some way and went, this is the one that makes the most sense to me. And it's changed over time, but as I've learned more or learned less, this is how mine has changed or not. So there is no difference between you and I in the thing that you're arguing.
There is.
At the end of the day, you still chose a morality, but you are allowing them to set the rules, the people you've chosen and gone. But there's not a difference in you can unchoose it if you want. You can become a secular humanist tomorrow if you like. There's no objective force making that the morality for you. You came about it the same way I came about it, but mine was much more well-reasoned and needed way better justification.
Yeah, there are differences. There are differences, but the differences are that I recognize that there are no problems with my morality that are in any way solved by appealing to a God.
Yeah.
So the reason why I wouldn't particularly become a secular humanist or something of that nature is because I am dealing with this very issue that I was trying to maybe find a rebuttal to myself, not something that I'm trying to convince you of, but this is a dilemma that I have myself, and I'm trying to find an answer to it. And the reason why secular humanism
what is the dilemma? What is the problem? Because I think I can solve this.
Yes. So the dilemma that I have is that if I adopt the self-meaning, the secular humanism, the adoption of morality, essentially all of that, it does lead to what I think is the conclusion that it's a landscape of different meanings, different desires that can clash with each other, and that essentially is what we see in the history and our current society. And that is kind of, it means that I have, just a second. And that means that I have to accept essentially that the evil that is done around the world is essentially neither right or wrong. It is actually right, because if meaning...
No, it's not right.
It is, because if my meaning is my priority...
No, it's fucking not. No, it's fucking not. What's wrong is not right.
All right, let's discuss it.
No, you cannot both say it is wrong and it is right. You just said that you are forced to recognize that if we are allowed to make our own meaning, what is the objection? All you objected to was that it's complicated. that you're going to get a lot of different opinions. Congratulations, that's reality. The issue then becomes, how do you tell which of those positions lead to a better world and which lead to a worse world? And so we can start really simply. Laurent, does it make the world better if we encourage people to kill each other? Or does it make the world worse if we encourage people to kill each other? It makes the world worse. Does it make the world better if we discourage the indiscriminate killing of people? Yes, it makes the world better. You can do that for anything. And when there are questions where the answers are difficult, you've got to recognize that unless there's some knockdown, drag out argument, it's going to get messy. So what? How do you solve any of the problems that you're objecting to by appealing to a God? What does saying there is a God change about any of your moral concerns? Hello? Am I still on the show?
Have you left? I hear you. I just don't hear
It's a web
Laurent.
caller. You might need to tap his phone again.
Laurent.
Oh, yeah. You may have to tap your phone to wake up your phone and then tap the browser to wake that up, too, because we can't hear you right now. So
I'm
the question,
excited.
the question is, yes,
There we go.
the question is, how does appealing to a God solve any problem you've raised or would raise about morality? What does appealing to a God solve?
Just to come back to the point, so you mentioned that essentially what we should adopt.
I just fucking asked you a direct fucking question, and your response is to ignore that direct fucking. Your response is to ignore that direct fucking question and try to redirect.
No, I would like to rebuttal first
I would like you to answer the fucking question that I just asked you. I don't need a rebuttal because you're not in an argument.
But that was not my question. My dilemma here is, does atheism lead to the conclusion that evil is right? Whether I believe that God...
No, Laurent, shut up. I answered that question before you ever uttered a word. No, atheism does not lead to anything, period. I asked you a question which was very simple and direct, which is, what does appealing to a God solve? What problem in morality is solved by you appealing to a God? That's the question.
Sure, we can go there if you want, but essentially, if I believe in a God, then I come to a conclusion that...
Laurent, I'm muting you. When I ask you a direct question, here, I'm just going to tell you, I don't care what anybody thinks. It's because I'm smarter than you, and I understand this subject better than you, and I've spent more time thinking about it. So I'm asking you a fucking direct-ass question that will expose the problem in your thinking and save us all hours of time going around in circles. Is it helpful for me to put it that way? I try to avoid putting it that way, but you know what? I just got to call it like it is. This is a really simple issue. There is no problem that you've raised with regard to morality that is in any way solved by appealing to a God. And your foundational confusion, which we've addressed over and over and over again, is this notion of, does atheism lead to? And the answer is no, because atheism doesn't lead to anything. So whatever problem you presented with regard to morality, how is it solved? By appealing to a God. Once you realize, Laurent, that saying you're appealing to a God solves nothing, you will realize that you are complaining about things in morality that you cannot solve, that are just facets of reality, like a lot of different opinions. So, how does appealing to a God solve a problem with morality? Go.
So the belief in a God essentially allows me to essentially believe that there is a universal right and wrong for all of humanity instead of each individual person that makes their subjective conclusion on what is moral and not whatever.
No, the problem, no, Laurent. You just said that believing in God allows you to believe there is a universal right and wrong. But whether you believe there's a universal right and wrong is irrelevant to whether or not there is a universal right or wrong. You believing in a God allows you to convince yourself that there's a universal right and wrong, even though there isn't.
Yes, that is true, but that is where faith. Yes.
Hang on, let me jump in here because I'm going to pop back to the words you were saying before because you've actually refuted your own points already. Because you were complaining about if we stop, let me finish. You haven't even heard my point. There's no way to interrupt and no. If we are going with what you were describing earlier, that with the secular points of views, then everybody gets to just defend their position and one person could say something is right and somebody else is wrong and you want to avoid the clash. That's when I laughed at you, as though when the world has been the most filled with only religion, there were no clashes. And so Matt is asking you how you are solving this problem with an appeal to a God. And you're basically saying because that God says this is right and this is wrong. But somebody else, because your actual adoption was also subjective, says their God says your right is their wrong or their wrong is your right. It literally, as Matt is trying to get you to understand, does not solve your main contention. However, if you actually do have to have a moral justification that is secular, then you actually have to apply things like reason and go, for example, slavery is wrong because of the violation of the autonomy of the individual involved. And then you have to describe what all of those words mean. And you have to win that as an actual argument, as opposed to if you are in most religions where you I shouldn't say most, in many religions where you actually have to say, slavery isn't wrong under certain circumstances. Your clash opposition is literally the basis of wars happening now and many clashes over the years. As Matt has said, it doesn't solve anything to add a God to it. In a lot of ways, it holds people back because you will notice that nations that actually adopt some form of secularism, that have high happiness indexes, have independently come to roughly the same set of moral guides that affect their laws. And yet, with the religious governments, it's completely different because it's according to the whims of those who take power.
And it's even worse than that, Laurent, because what you're doing is looking at morality, seeing some problem, and then trying to find a way to solve it. You're not advocating for a God existing as a necessity to some facet of reality. You're arguing that belief in a God gives you comfort that there is some absolute standard of right and wrong, even if there's not. And if there's not an absolute standard of right and wrong, then every second you've spent advocating for a God for morality is actually you engaged in self-deception and dishonesty. Instead of looking for an excuse to keep believing in a God and not having to think about the difficulties of morality, give yourself permission to be honest and assess the situation and say, you know what? Maybe there is no ultimate, universal, non-arbitrary, passed down from on high, right or wrong. And yet there can still be, in much the same way that you can make good moves and bad moves in a game of chess, even though we invented it and the rules could have been anything, there are good moves and bad moves in that. Similarly, there are good moves and bad moves in life. And a really bad move in life is to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm gonna believe in a God because it provides me with comfort that there is universal right and wrong, even if there's not. You're basically saying you're willing to lie to yourself because it feels good.
Okay, I wonder when I'll be able to talk, but it's difficult to make a point.
You'll be able to talk. You'll be able to talk, Laurent. You'll be able to talk exactly when I stop talking. And you started by saying, I wonder when I'll be able to talk. See, that's when you would be able to talk. And I would have allowed you to continue talking if you hadn't decided to be such a whiny ass about it.
How am I being a whiny ass about it?
Because the instant where you could have said something useful and important, where you could have said, hey, that's an interesting thought about morality, I'll have to consider that. Or you could have said, hey, here's something you said that was factually wrong. Here's a correction to that. Or here's an area where I said something that was incorrect that I hadn't considered, and I've now changed to this. But instead, You decided
look, I'm trying to rebuttal. I tried to bring my point, but you just
instead, you just decided to fucking try and interrupt me. Instead of doing any of those things that are what a decent, reasonable person would do in an actual conversation, you decided to do a passive-aggressive stroke of, am I allowed to talk now? Well, guess what, motherfucker? You're not allowed to talk anymore today. Call back some other time when you learn how to think about what was said and respond by saying, thank you for engaging my topic. Thank you for letting me know that I didn't have to sit here and invent a fictional God to give me fictional comfort, that there's a fictional universal right or wrong, and that I could actually reconsider and evaluate things with a goal of going with the truth and going to where the truth leads, rather than whining like a little bitch instead of engaging in honest conversation. Goodbye, Laurent.
I love a complaint from a person who says we weren't listening to someone who interrupted me to disagree with my point before I had begun making it.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Jimmy hadn't even got 3 words out.
No, I don't agree with Jimmy.
We just gave you a thorough lecture on both the foundations of morality and your confusion about what atheism is, what it's not, what it implies, what can be inferred from it, what necessarily follows. But you weren't actually interested in actual reasonable conversation. You were interested in your time to talk and whining about, is it my turn to talk yet? If you understood how conversations work, you would have known it was your time to talk, and you would have known that the best thing you could do is say, wow, thanks for making points I hadn't really considered, because it's very evident that you have not considered those.
I don't even need the capitulation, just acknowledgement that you even heard it.